If you clicked on this video, you've probably picked a chess opening before, and most likely you saw a video that called it the best move. Or you watched your favorite streamer play it and figured it must be good if they're winning with it.
No.
Then you played it for a week, lost a few games you didn't understand, and rinse and repeat. Here's the actual problem. Almost nobody tells you which opening is good for you. They tell you which one is objectively strong, or which one a world champion played, as if that means anything when you're 1,200 and just trying to survive the first 10 moves. But chess openings aren't one size fits all. Every single one has a personality. Some reward patience, some reward chaos. Some are built for someone who wants a fight, and others are built for someone who'd rather slowly squeeze the life out of their opponent over 40 moves. The opening that's objectively best according to a database means nothing if it puts you in positions you hate playing. So that's what this video actually is. 12 of the most important openings in chess, broken down not just by what the moves are, but by what kind of player each one is actually built for. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which openings were made for you and which ones you should ignore completely, no matter how many grandmasters play them. Let's start with the one I'd recommend to almost any beginner first. Not because it's the best one on this list, but because it teaches you how to actually play chess better than almost anything else out there. The Italian game has been played and studied for centuries, and it's still one of the most popular choices at every level today. That's not nostalgia, it's just a really good opening. If you're a beginner who wants to learn actual chess on a deeper level, this might be the closest thing to a perfect starting point that exists. The moves are e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. 5 moves and you're already in one of the most principled positions on the board. Your pawn controls the center, your knight is developed and attacks black's central pawn. And that bishop on c4 sits on the most active diagonal available, pointing straight at black's kingside, specifically at f7. Nothing's getting checkmated anytime soon, but your opponent has to keep that bishop in the back of their mind for the entire game. Here's where black actually has a real decision to make, and it shapes everything else that follows. The classical answer is bishop c5, the giuoco piano, mirroring your development and aiming right back at your own f2 pawn. It's the most popular response, and it works, but there's a sharper, more aggressive option that a lot of players reach for instead. Knight f6, the two knights defense, ignoring your threat on f7 entirely and counterattacking in the center instead. This is where the most famous trap in the whole opening lies. Push your knight to g5, threatening that same f7 pawn, and if black isn't careful, you can sacrifice the knight on f7 itself, the fried liver attack, dragging black's king out into the open in exchange for the piece. It's been winning games at the club level for centuries, precisely because the resulting attack is so much faster than it looks. Black does have ways to navigate it safely, but if they don't know the theory, this is one of the most punishing lines you can walk an unprepared opponent into. If black would rather sidestep all of that danger entirely, there's a third option, bishop e7, the Hungarian defense, a quieter, more passive setup that takes the sting out of any knight g5 ideas completely at the cost of giving you a freer, more comfortable position to build from. Whichever way black responds, the version you'll want to learn first as your main plan is the slow Italian. d3, knight to d2, castle, rook to e1 moves that look standard and uninteresting, which is exactly the point. Every piece is doing its job. Then you inch forward, knight reroutes to g3, and when the moment's right, you push d4. The position black's been sitting comfortably in suddenly starts collapsing under the weight of everything you've built. No single move won the game. The whole setup did. Magnus Carlsen has built entire wins out of this exact structure. If the idea of slowly outplaying someone over 40 moves sounds more satisfying than winning on move 15, the Italian was made for you. If that sounds like torture instead, push d4 early and the whole character flips. The center opens, pieces get active fast, tactics start appearing out of nowhere, same starting moves, completely different fight. Go even further down the rabbit hole, and there's the Evans Gambit, where you sacrifice a pawn on move 4, blow the position open immediately, and get pure attacking chess from the first moves. It's been catching people off guard for 200 years, and Stockfish rates it highly even down material. That's how you know it actually works. The Italian is for the player who wants to get better at chess, not just better at one opening. It teaches you how pieces work together, how to build pressure gradually, how to be patient and trust your position, and, if your opponent gives you the chance, how to punish carelessness fast and decisively. That range is exactly why it survived 500 years. If the Italian is a foundation, the Ruy Lopez is what serious players build on top of it. Same opening moves as the Italian: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. But instead of bishop c4, white plays bishop b5. One square. Completely different game. The Italian bishop on c4 is aggressive, aimed straight at f7. The Ruy Lopez is more subtle. Bishop b5 pins the knight defending black's e5 pawn. Nothing's threatened immediately, white's just created a structural problem black has to think about for the rest of the opening. People have literally called this the Spanish torture, because that's what it feels like to play against if you don't know what you're doing. Black's main answer is a6, kicking the bishop and forcing a decision. This is called the Morphy defense, and it's been the most common response for over a century. White usually retreats to a4 rather than trading on c6, keeping the pin alive and the long game going. But there's a second answer that's become just as important at the top level, the Berlin defense, where black develops the knight to f6 and offers a trade of queens almost immediately. It leads to this famously dry, hard-to-crack endgame nicknamed the Berlin Wall, drawish, defensible, and no real weaknesses. Kramnik used it to take the World Championship off Kasparov in 2000, and it's been a top-level staple ever since, because it gives black a way to play the Ruy Lopez without ever facing the kind of long-term squeeze the Morphy defense invites. If you'd rather skip the philosophy lesson entirely, there's also the exchange variation. Trade your bishop for the knight on c6 right away, double black's pawns, and just play a cleaner version of the position. You give up the bishop pair, but you get a structural target that doesn't go away, and a much simpler decision tree for yourself. It's the practical player's way into this opening. Assuming black plays normally, white's plan is to eventually push d4 and take the center, but unlike the Italian, you earn it first. Castle, play c3 to reinforce things, get the rook to e1, maneuver every piece to its ideal square, and only then commit. By the time you do, black's dealing with pressure from multiple directions, and you don't need to do anything dramatic. The position's already doing the work. One thing you need to know if you take this up as white: the martial attack. Black sacrifices a pawn specifically to blow the position open and come straight at your king. It's been a fully respected weapon at the highest level for over a century, and if you don't know it's coming, getting hit by it cold is genuinely unpleasant. You don't need to memorize the refutation move for move, you just need to know the position exists so you're not seeing it for the first time in a real game. The Ruy Lopez isn't for everyone. The theory runs deep, the positions are demanding, and every world champion from Morphy to Carlsen has used this as a main weapon for a reason. It rewards understanding more than memorization, but it does demand both. If you're serious about getting better at chess, not just winning club games, there's nothing quite like it. If the Ruy Lopez rewards patience, the Scotch rewards the complete opposite. If a long strategic grind sounds like torture, this is your breath of fresh air. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then immediately d4. It looks just like the previous two openings, but without the slow build-up required to get to d4. White challenges black's center on move 3 and forces the issue right away. Black takes the pawn, white recaptures with the knight, and the center's wide open immediately. From here, black has a real decision to make. The classical choice is bishop c5, develop naturally, eye that knight on d4, play something balanced and familiar. It's still the most common response, and for good reason. It's sound, it doesn't ask black to remember much, and it just works. But there's a second answer that's become popular lately. Knight f6, hitting the e4 pawn immediately instead of developing quietly. Kasparov leaned on this version heavily through the 90s, usually meeting it by trading on c6 to double black's pawns, then pushing e5 to kick the knight straight back where it came from. That's not some passive sideline he stumbled into, it's a genuinely sharp, well-studied fight. And the fact that the best player in the world chose it tells you everything about whether the Scotch is just a beginner shortcut. It isn't. The big appeal for you as white is that it sidesteps most of the heavy theory that comes with a Ruy Lopez. If a Ruy Lopez book has ever made you want to close the laptop, the Scotch is the fix. You still need the key ideas and patterns, but you're not memorizing 40 moves before the game even starts. White's knight on d4 does real work regardless of which defense black picks. It sits in the heart of the board, controls key squares, and is a constant headache to deal with. Take it out of frustration and white's left with an extremely strong center for the rest of the game. Now, if you want something different entirely, there's the Scotch Gambit. Instead of recapturing on d4 with the knight, You develop the bishop straight to c4. You're not grabbing the pawn back yet, you're just getting a piece out fast and aiming it at f7. Here's what's actually clever about it. This move quietly steers the game toward Italian game-style positions, except black doesn't get access to some of the calmer, more drawish setups the real Italian allows, since the centre's already been opened up. It's a way of forcing a more aggressive fight, even if your opponent wanted to play it safe. If the Italian was patient and the Ruy Lopez was suffocating, the Scotch is just a fight. Sharp, unbalanced, both sides swinging, one mistake changing everything. If you like the tactical side of the Italian, this turns that energy up considerably, and the Gambit lines turn it up again past that. The Scotch gets you a fight without drowning in theory. The Vienna game takes that further, it gets you a fight your opponent doesn't even see coming. You go e4, and after e5 you play knight c3 instead of knight f3. It looks counterintuitive since you don't threaten anything immediately, quite like the knight on f3 attacks black's central pawn. But the idea is you're setting up f4, and if black doesn't know exactly what's coming, they're in for a rough time. Here's the part most people miss. The Vienna isn't just a slower way to play the King's Gambit, which we'll cover in a bit. The move order is the whole trick. In the King's Gambit, you play f4 immediately on move 2 before your knight's even out, which means if black takes the pawn, you're fighting to get it back while you're still behind on development. The Vienna flips that. You develop the knight to c3 first, then play f4 on move 3. So if black grabs the pawn with e takes f4, you've got e5 ready to go, kicking their knight on f6 back to where it started. And now you're not just even on development, you're ahead, with an open position to attack into. Same gambit idea as the King's Gambit, except you've already done your homework before offering the pawn. Black's got 3 real options here, except with exf4, and you get exactly what was just described. A fast lead in development and an open game to attack in. Most beginners take this pawn instinctively because free material feels too good to pass up, and that instinct is exactly what makes this such a strong, practical weapon below a certain level. Decline quietly with d6 or develop with knight c6 instead, and you're still slightly better off. Black's playing a touch passively and you keep your initiative. The only move that actually holds the balance for black is the sharper d5 right back at you, hitting your center immediately instead of taking the bait. Most players don't find that one over the board, and that's really the heart of why the Vienna works as a surprise weapon. Not because it's secretly winning by force, but because almost nobody you'll face has seen the right answer. The real appeal of the Vienna isn't deep theoretical soundness, it's that nobody studies it. People know how to handle the Italian, they've seen the Ruy Lopez, they've probably lost to the Scotch once or twice. But knight c3 on move 2, followed by f4. Most players are guessing from that point on, and once the position opens up, guessing isn't enough. If you've ever wanted to watch someone realize they're in trouble several moves later than they should have, this is that opening. Now while the Vienna catches people off guard, the King's Gambit doesn't even try to hide what it's doing. It's the most aggressive pawn offer in chess, and it's been doing damage for 500 years. e4, e5, and then f4. White offers a pawn on move 2 before a single piece is developed. The idea is simple. Sacrifice the f-pawn to blow open the center, develop pieces at lightning speed, and come straight at black's king before they get comfortable. Forget slow build-up. You're declaring from move 2 that you came here to attack. Black's got 3 real ways to respond, and each one leads to a completely different fight. Most players accept with e takes f4, and from there white plays knight f3, stopping black's queen from jumping out to h4 with check, and getting ready to build a real attack down that newly opened f-file. Black usually tries to hang onto the pawn with g5, defending it and grabbing space on the king side at the same time. That's where the real main line kicks in. White plays h4, attacking that g5 pawn and forcing black to push g4, kicking your knight away. From here you jump the knight to e5. This is the Kieseritzky, the most studied line in the whole opening, eyeing f7 and g4 simultaneously while black's still trying to finish developing. The position gets razor sharp fast, and if black's not precise, that g and h pawn, advance black made to hold the extra material, ends up exposing their own king more than it protects anything. If you want something even wilder, there's the Muzio Gambit. Instead of grabbing material back carefully, you castle straight into the position and just sacrifice a whole knight for it, getting 3 pieces bearing down on f7 in exchange. It's about as aggressive as a chess opening gets. You're not even trying to get the pawn back anymore. You're trying to end the game before black finishes developing. It's objectively risky, but it's also the kind of line that wins instantly against anyone who hasn't studied the defense. Not every black player wants to wade into all that theory, though. Decline politely with bishop c5 instead, the classical variation, and black just develops normally, eyes a strong diagonal, and avoids the whole mess. Or, more dangerously for you, black can hit back immediately with d5, the Faulkbeer counter-gambit, offering you a pawn right back and fighting for the center before you've gotten anything going. There's a real trap buried in here for careless white players. Grab the wrong pawn back with f takes e5 instead of the correct e takes d5, and black has a queen check on h4 that wins a rook outright. It's well known enough now that nobody falls for it at a decent level, but it tells you the Faulkbeer isn't black playing it safe. It's black trying to make you pay for being aggressive without doing the prep work first. Here's the honest part. Modern engines have shown that with perfect play in the main accepted lines, black can hold the extra pawn and survive. So if you're playing Magnus Carlsen, maybe skip it, but your opponents aren't engines. Below 2000, facing this cold with zero preparation is genuinely terrifying. The positions are sharp enough, and the threats come fast enough that one mistake usually ends the game outright, and the psychological pressure of being attacked from move 2 is real. The King's Gambit is also just fun. Not every opening decision has to maximize your theoretical edge. Sometimes you want to sacrifice a pawn, or, in the Muzio's case, a whole piece, and see how many attackers you can throw at the enemy king. If you'd rather lose a brilliant game than win a boring one, this is your opening. It's not a shortcut, it's a statement. Everything so far has been from white's side of the board. Now let's flip it, because if you're playing black against white's e4, the single most powerful response and the most studied opening in all of chess is the Sicilian Defense. White plays e4, and instead of e5, you play c5. Not the center pawn, the c pawn. That single decision sets off the most complex, most studied, most played opening in the history of chess. Here's what makes the Sicilian different from almost everything else black can play against e4. Most black defenses are built around surviving, playing solid, staying safe, hoping to grind out a draw against a stronger center. The Sicilian isn't that. Black wins nearly as often as white does from these positions, which is remarkable for an opening where black is reacting rather than setting the agenda. This is the one defense where you're not just trying to hang on, you're actually playing for the win from move 1. The idea behind c5 is that you're not trying to match white in the center, you're fighting for it from the side. That pawn controls d4, exactly where white wants to plant a piece. You're saying, I'm not handing you the center for free, and I'm not playing into the positions you've prepared either. It creates an immediate imbalance, and that imbalance is the whole point. Kasparov built his career on it. Fischer called it the best response to e4. Once you commit to c5, white actually has a real decision to make too, and it shapes the kind of fight you're walking into. White can play knight f3 followed by d4, heading into the open Sicilian, the sharp, deeply theoretical main road, where the center pawns trade off and you end up with a pawn on d6 against white's pawn on e4. White gets a small space edge, but you get a half-open c-file, and that rook becomes seriously dangerous as the game goes on. Or white sidesteps the whole fight with knight c3 instead, the closed Sicilian, keeping things slower and more strategic, and denying you that same sharp counterplay. You need real answers to both, because you don't get to choose which one you're walking into. Assuming you're in the open Sicilian, the games are almost always decisive. Draws are rare here because neither side wants to simplify. When white castles long, it turns into all-out war. Kings on opposite sides, both players racing to break through first. It's some of the most exciting chess you'll ever play. The Sicilian has enough variations to be its own video, and it probably will be one eventually. But the main three to know are the Najdorf, the Dragon, and the Accelerated Dragon, three completely different personalities living inside the same defense. The Najdorf is the most complex by a wide margin. After you play a 6, white has more than 10 reasonable replies, and you need a real answer prepared for each one. This is the choice for players who want maximum complexity and are ready to spend hours preparing for it. The Dragon hands you one of the most dangerous bishops in chess, fianchettoed on g7 and raking across the entire board. But it cuts both ways. White's kingside attack can end the game before you've even realized what happened if you're not ready for it. It's high risk, high reward, and it produces some of the most famous attacking games in chess history on both sides. The accelerated dragon gets you that same bishop and a very similar middle game, but with noticeably less memorization up front, which makes it the practical choice if the Najdorf's 10+ responses sound like too much to prepare for. The honest caveat, and it's a real one: the Sicilian demands genuine work no matter which version you choose. Play c5 without knowing what you're doing and you'll land in positions you don't understand against someone who does. But put that work in and no other defense gives black this much to actually fight with. The Sicilian is black's most ambitious answer to e4, but ambition costs you sharp, theory-heavy positions from move 1. The French defense takes the opposite approach. Build a fortress first and invite white to try and break it. White plays e4 and you play e6. That one quiet pawn move sets up an entire philosophy. Let white take the center for now and build something underneath it that's genuinely hard to break. White plays d4, you play d5, and right here white faces a decision that shapes the rest of your game. Knight c3 keeps the tension alive and invites bishop b4, the winnower, your sharpest and most ambitious answer in the whole defense. You pin white's knight and threaten to trade it for your bishop outright. After the trade, white's queenside pawns end up structurally weaker, which is exactly the kind of long-term target you want, even though white gets the bishop pair back in exchange and a dangerous diagonal of their own to work with. It's a genuinely sharp, double-edged fight either way, and it's the version of the French that rewards players who like complications. Knight d2 instead, the Tarrasch specifically avoids handing you that pin, since bishop b4 doesn't accomplish much anymore. It's a calmer, more controlled fight, and it's become a popular way for white to sidestep the winnower's complications entirely. Either way, white usually pushes e5 and you end up with a locked, solid pawn structure that's genuinely hard to break through. It looks passive to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking at. Experienced players know it's a fortress. That's the French's whole identity. Give up space deliberately and build something rock-solid behind it. The real cost is your light-squared bishop, which starts the game boxed in behind your own pawn chain, but it's a known problem with known solutions, not a permanent flaw. The first fix is to simply play b6 and bring it to b7, or alternatively, you can free it up later instead of getting it out right away. Play the f6 break, reroute the bishop out through e8, and land it on g6 or h5, putting real pressure into white's position instead of leaving it stuck, doing nothing. Which path you take depends on the exact structure you end up in, but the bishop is never actually doomed, it just needs a plan. Your counterplay comes on the queen side. While white's trying to crack your king side open, you're pushing pawns on the other side and building real threats of your own. The c5 break is your main weapon. Push it at the right moment, challenge white's center, and the position that looked completely passive suddenly has teeth. You don't wait to get attacked. You absorb the pressure and hit back somewhere else. The French is for the player who doesn't panic under pressure, who's fine giving up space and absorbing an attack, trusting their structure is solid enough to weather it. It's not the flashiest defense on this list. But in the right hands, it's one of the most frustrating things you can hand your opponent. Sometimes that's exactly what you want. The French is a fortress. The Caro-Kann is the same fortress with better ventilation. What if you played the exact same fortress as the French, but let your bishop actually get out of the house first? That's the Caro-Kann. e4, and you play c6, setting up the same central challenge as the French with d5 next move, but with one key sequencing difference that changes everything. In the French, your light-squared bishop gets locked behind your own pawns the moment e6 goes down. Here, you haven't committed to e6 yet, so before the structure closes up, you get your bishop out to f5 or g4 first outside the pawn chain entirely. One move earlier in the sequence, and the bishop problem that defines the French just doesn't exist for you. White's got a real choice in how to meet this, and it shapes the whole rest of the game. The most popular and statistically best-scoring try for white is the advance variation. Push e5 immediately, gaining space and denying you the chance to trade pawns in the center at all. White's typical follow-up is to go after your light-squared bishop directly with h4 and h5, trying to make the one piece that's supposed to be your advantage over the French into a target instead. You'll need to know how to meet that pressure, not just admire your own well-placed bishop. If white plays knight c3 or knight d2 instead, you're heading into the classical variation, still the single most popular way to play this whole opening, even today. You trade on e4, white recaptures with the knight, and then comes the moment that defines the entire defense. Bishop f5, getting that piece out before e6 locks it away. White often responds with knight g3, kicking your bishop to g6, then h4 and h5, trying to harass it even after it's already escaped. It's a real fight, but you're fighting from a structurally sound position the whole way through. There's also the exchange variation, where white trades on d5 immediately, and the position flattens out into something that actually resembles a London system, with colours reversed, quiet, balanced, and for a long time considered a little harmless. That reputation's changed in recent years. Strong players have picked it back up, specifically because it gives white a small, stable, low-risk edge that's genuinely annoying to deal with if you're not ready for it. Your typical answer is to finish developing and look for a minority attack of your own on the queenside with b5 and b4, flipping the same strategic idea white uses against you in other openings back onto them. The same pawn exchange idea is also possible in the French defense, which leads to very similar positions. If white wants something sharper than any of that, there's the Panov-Botvinnik attack, trading on d5 and then pushing c4, intentionally creating an isolated queen's pawn structure that looks a lot like a queen's gambit gone sideways. It trades white's safety for real attacking chances, and it's a genuinely different kind of fight than anything else in this whole defense. Across almost every version, though, your long-term targets stay the same. Push c5 when the opportunity presents itself, grab the c-file whenever pawns trade off on c5 or c6, and develop your pieces normally. You're not signing up for fireworks. You're signing up for a position where you never have to panic, no matter which version white throws at you. The Caro-Kann gives you a solid defense without heavy theory. The Scandinavian gives you something simpler and a lot more direct. Every defense so far takes some patience before things get going. The Scandinavian skips that part entirely. After e4, you immediately play d5, challenging white's center before a single piece is developed. White takes the pawn, you recapture with the queen, and by move 2, your queen is already out. It's the most direct response to e4 on this list. Once white plays knight c3 to hit your queen, you've got a real decision, and it's the one that actually defines which version of this opening you're playing. The classical answer is queen f5, pinning white's knight to their own king and gaining a tempo in the process. It's still the most popular and most deeply studied response. You follow up with c6 to give your queen an escape square, develop normally, and you're in a structure that resembles a Caro-Kann with your queen already out. But there's a second option that's earned real respect over the last few decades. Queen d6, the Gubinski melts. It keeps your queen more central instead of tucking it away on the edge of the board, and for years people dismissed it because the queen looked exposed to ideas like knight b5. Grandmaster Sergei Tivyakov spent years proving that dismissal wrong, playing it successfully against some of the best players in the world, and it's a fully respected, modern way to handle this position now. There's also queen d8, simply retreating the queen home, the oldest and safest of the three, asking for almost no theoretical risk in exchange for a slightly passive position. Once your queen's settled, the actual middle game plan looks the same across most of these lines. Get your light-squared bishop out to f5 or g4 before you play e6, since that's the one window where it isn't stuck behind your own pawn chain. Develop your knight to f6, follow up with e6 to firm up the center, and you're ready to castle. Here's the part that makes the Scandinavian genuinely interesting strategically. You don't have to castle kingside just because it's the default. Castling queenside instead puts your rook straight onto the d-file, often lined up right behind your own queen, creating real pressure down the center before either side has even started attacking. From there, your plan is queenside expansion, pushing b5 and c5 at the right moments to open lines and create targets, while white's left figuring out how to convert their slight space and development edge into something concrete. If you'd rather avoid moving your queen twice in the opening at all, there's a more modern approach. Delay the recapture entirely and play knight f6 instead, hitting the pawn on d5 with a piece rather than your queen. You get the pawn back a move later through normal development instead of an early queen excursion, sidestepping the main criticism of this whole opening before it ever becomes relevant. The appeal across all of these versions is the same: minimal memorization, a clear plan from the very first move, and white's the one who has to figure out how to convert their slight theoretical edge, which at most levels they won't. It's not the most ambitious defense on this list, but it's honest, it's direct, and it works. Everything on this list so far has started with e4. Now we're changing gears completely, and I mean that literally d4 openings have a different rhythm, a different energy, a different set of ideas. The Queen's Gambit is where that world begins. d4, d5, then c4. White offers a pawn on the side of the board to pull black's central pawn away from the center. That's the gambit. In practice, almost nobody takes you up on it at a serious level, and that's fine, because the gambit was never really about the pawn. If black does grab it with d takes c4, you're not actually losing anything permanent. Develop normally, play e3, and you'll recover the pawn a few moves later with the bishop landing on c4, often gaining a tempo in the process. It's a perfectly playable line for you, but it's not where the real fight is. The real fight is in how black declines. Most experienced opponents play e6, the orthodox defense, reinforcing their d5 pawn and opening the diagonal for their dark-squared bishop, while leaving their light-squared bishop a little boxed in. This is where the most famous strategic plan in the entire opening lives. If the center gets resolved with c takes d5, e takes d5, you reach the Carlsbad structure, your pawns on d4, and e3 against blacks on d5 and c6. And from here, your long-term plan is the minority attack. Push your B and A pawns forward, even though you have fewer pawns on that side of the board. Force black to make structural concessions defending against it, and create a permanent weakness you can target for the rest of the game. It's a slow, patient plan, but it's been winning games at the highest level for over a century, and it's the reason the orthodox structures are taken so seriously instead of just being the safe option. The other major way black declines is c6 instead, the Slav, defending the same pawn while keeping that light-squared bishop's diagonal open so it doesn't get stuck the way it can in the orthodox. If black combines c6 and e6 together, you're facing the semi-Slav, one of the most respected and sharpest defenses you'll see at any serious level, and one that demands you actually know your plans rather than coast on the opening's reputation. Whichever structure you end up in, your typical development looks the same. Knight c3, the bishop pin with bg5 against black's knight on f6, e3 to solidify, bishop to d3, and castle. From there, you're choosing between that long-term minority attack on the queen side or a more direct central break with f3 and e4 once your pieces are fully coordinated, the kind of plan that turns a quiet positional opening into a real attacking game if black isn't paying attention. The Queen's Gambit has been played at every World Championship for over a century, and it's not a surprise as this opening gives you a natural, understandable plan against basically anything black tries, without demanding enormous memorization just to reach a good position. The Queen's Gambit gives you rich strategic positions with clear, long-term plans. The London system gives you something different. A system. The same setup every single game, no matter what black does. The London system has a reputation. Ask around and it's either the most practical opening in chess or the most boring one. The truth is closer to practical than people want to admit, and it shares more in common with the Queen's Gambit than most people realize, even though the two openings feel completely different to play. You play d4, bishop f4, knight f3. That's basically the whole plan. The bishop comes out early, your pieces find natural squares, and you build a setup that holds up against almost anything black tries. Unlike the Queen's Gambit, you're not trying to provoke a fight over the c4 pawn or steer black into a specific structure. You're not asking black any questions at all in the opening. You're just building your own position first and figuring out the rest later. The most common way black tries to disrupt this is with c5, followed by queen b6 hitting your undefended b2 pawn and pressuring your center before you've finished developing. Meet it head-on with queen b3, offering the queen trade directly. If black takes, you recapture with the a-pawn and end up with a comfortable structure and an open file for your rook. If black tries to fight for an Indian-style setup instead, playing g6 and fianchettoing their own dark-squared bishop, adjust by putting your bishop on e2 instead of d3, since d3 has much less scope against a fianchettoed king, and continue with c3 and nbd2 to keep your structure intact. Your actual winning plan once you're through the opening is one of two routes. A central break with e4 once everything's developed, or a kingside plan built around knight e5, supported by your pawn and bishop, followed by f4. If all of that sounds a little too patient for your taste, there's a sharper relative worth knowing about, the Jobava London. Instead of the calm c3 setup, you develop the knight to c3 early instead, before you've even decided where your c-pawn is going, and the whole character of the opening flips. That knight on c3 eyes b5, hitting c7 in combination with your bishop on f4, creating real threats as early as move 4, and your opponent has to be very careful. Where the classic London builds a fortress and waits, the Jobava London picks a fight. Castle queenside, push f3 and g4, and launch a kingside pawn storm that feels a lot more like a king's pawn opening than anything you'd expect from a system. Top players like Richard Rapport and Bardo Jobava himself have used it to real effect, precisely because most opponents have studied the calm version of the London and have no idea what to do against the aggressive one. It's why even Magnus Carlsen has reached for one version of this opening or another at the highest level. It's easy to learn, genuinely hard to face, and whichever flavor you pick, it rewards understanding the plan far more than memorizing exact moves. The London is about reliability. The King's Indian is the opposite, walking into a dangerous position on purpose, trusting you know exactly how to blow it up. I saved the most dynamic opening on this list for last, and it's earned the spot. White plays d4, knight f3, c4, building a massive center. Instead of challenging it immediately, you let it happen. Knight f6, g6, bishop g7, castle. Fianchetto the bishop, tuck the king away, and just watch white take all the space they want. Then you hit back. The most famous version of this fight is the classical setup. White plays e4 and knight c3, you respond with d6 and eventually e5. And from here the game often heads into what's called the Mar del Plata variation, one of the most studied, most thematically pure positions in this whole defense. White castles, you bring your knight to c6, white pushes d5, kicking it to e7, and from there both sides know exactly what they're racing toward. White expands on the queenside with moves like b4 and c5, the bayonet attack, when white commits to it early and aggressively. You meanwhile reroute your knight from f6 to d7, which actually slows down white's queenside plans while clearing the way for your own kingside pawn storm. f5, then f4, then g5, going straight after white's king. It's not a metaphor. Both sides are quite literally racing each other to deliver the first real blow on opposite sides of the board. Not every white player wants that fight, though. Some sidestep the whole thing with the four pawns attack instead, pushing f4 early to build an enormous four-pawn center before you've even castled. It's the most aggressive option on the table for white, and it's also the riskiest. That much space comes at the cost of falling behind in development, and if you can open the position up before white's pieces catch up, all that space turns into a weakness instead of a strength. Whichever setup you're facing, the position you're building toward is the same in spirit. That bishop on g7, sitting quiet for the first 15 moves, suddenly raking down the long diagonal with nowhere for white to hide once the center cracks open. The King's Indian is the ultimate counter-attacking defense. You're deliberately walking into a difficult position because you know exactly how to turn it around. It demands deep understanding, precise timing, and complete faith in your own calculation. Be off by even a move and white's center just steamrolls you. But get it right, and the positions you create are some of the most exciting in all of chess. Fischer played it. It was Kasparov's main weapon for most of his career, and he used it to beat the best players alive. The King's Indian doesn't just produce exciting games, it produces legendary ones. This is the hardest defense on this list. And that's all 12. But I promised you something at the start of this video. Not just what these openings are, but which ones are you. So let's actually do that. Find yourself in this list. If your idea of a perfect game is your opponent slowly realizing they've been losing for 20 moves, start with the Italian. It'll teach you more chess per game than anything else here. And when club players stop falling for your setups, graduate to the Ruy Lopez. That's the natural path. Same first moves, deeper game. The Queen's Gambit belongs to this same family if you'd rather start with d4. Patient, structured, always a plan. If you'd rather win by move 15 or lose trying, the Scotch, the Vienna, and the King's Gambit, in ascending order of insanity. The Scotch is a fight with a seatbelt on. The Vienna is a fight your opponent doesn't see coming. The King's Gambit is just a fight. Pick based on how much you enjoy apologizing to your own king. Playing black against a 4, here's the honest version. If you want to win and you're willing to study, Sicilian, no contest. If you want to never panic, Caro-Kann. If you want a complete plan by this Friday, Scandinavian. And the French is for a specific kind of person, someone who genuinely enjoys being attacked because they know the fortress holds. You know if that's you. Against d4, the King's Indian is the dream, but it's the hardest thing in this video, and I'm not pretending otherwise. If you're not ready for it yet, remember the Slav from the Queen's Gambit section. Same solid idea, fraction of the danger. Start there, earn your way to the King's Indian. Now the part nobody else will tell you. What to ignore. If you hate memorizing, skip the Najdorf and the Ruy Lopez. It doesn't matter how many world champions play them, you won't enjoy a single game. If slow positional grinds make you want to close the app, the French and the Standard London aren't for you either, no matter how solid they are. And if you're under about 1,400, you have my full permission to ignore anyone who says the King's Gambit doesn't work anymore. They're quoting an engine. And you're not playing engines. Pick one white opening, one answer to E4, one answer to D4. That's a complete repertoire. 3 openings, not 12. The other 9 will still be here when you're ready. Let me know in the comments which 3 you picked. I read all of them. And make sure to subscribe if this helped. There's a lot more chess coming.